Hello, everybody. This is Çiğdem Ayvaz-Gerongun. I am the Data Protection and Technology Law Group Chair at TÜSİAD and also the founding and managing partner of SRP Law Firm. Good morning or good evening for the audience. Bugün konuşmamızın devamını İngilizce devam edeceğiz. Bütün konuşma İngilizce olacak ama Türkçe çeviri için bir çeviri opsiyonumuz var. Ekranlarınızda görebileceğinizi zannediyorum. Çeviri opsiyonundan Türkçe'de dinleyebilirsiniz bizleri. We have a translation option so that you can use the translation if you prefer to listen us in Turkish. So let's start. Yes. Okay, confirm your speaking language. It says for me, so I confirmed. So firstly, tonight or today, what we are talking about, just a second. Yes, today we are talking about AI and law. What is the artificial intelligence and how it relates with the law in terms of digitalization and rewarding of legal boundaries. Esteemed guests and fellow participants, I'm honored to welcome you all into this important discussion today on AI law and its digitalization aspects. As we gather here today, we find ourselves at the intersection of the innovation and responsibility, exploring the vast potential and challenges that AI presents to our society, balancing innovation with the protection of legal principles in key to harnessing the full potential of artificial intelligence in the realm of law. So just to start, I would like to kindly introduce my dear friend and also the TÜSİAD Silikon Valley Network Chair Ayşegül İlgeniz for her remarks. Ayşegül, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thanks to Aylin and Alex for this great panel today. I wanted to welcome our friends from Silicon Valley Network, as well as our participants from the Istanbul network of TÜSİAD. We're all three of us are calling in from San Francisco. As you guys know, we do have a network out here based on the TÜSİAD volunteers. And what we devised together is a series of events on artificial intelligence and how it's changing the world and what are the implications of it coming from the heart of Silicon Valley. So this one is particularly focused on the legal implications of artificial intelligence, which we're hoping that you will find absolutely useful since we have such distinguished panelists with us today. So basically, we're going to be focused on particularly the privacy concerns, cybersecurity, IP rights, as well as some ethical standard questions. Since these are big causes for concern today, it's very typical that technology outpaces basically legal frameworks as well as governance structures. And this is pretty much how it's been the past couple of decades in Silicon Valley. In this case, it might have very severe consequences and implications. So we wanted to make sure that you actually hear and learn about these. Basically, there has been, as you probably have heard, several lawsuits over the IP rights issues, data usage issues, and ownership. And it's going to be increasing even with the coming of the video form now of large language models. So it's going to be multiplying. So today, I think we will try to tackle these issues of how will legal uncertainty go hand in hand with artificial intelligence as technology develops. So with that, I very much look forward to listening from our distinguished panelists, Aylin and Alex today. Thanks, guys. Over to you.
Okay, so thank you very much for the remarks, Ayşegül. So I would like to give the floor to firstly to both Aylin and Alex. Aylin is the Senior Counsel and MedTech Digital in Johnson & Johnson, and Alex is the partner at Allen & Overy in Tech Group. So, Aylin and Alex, AI is revolutionizing how we live, work, and interact in the world around us. AI is shaping the today and the future of our world, changing the industries, enhancing our daily lives, and offering solutions to some of the most complex problems that we have faced. However, with the transformative power comes a profound responsibility. And today we come together not only to talk about the achievements of AI, but also to engage in the thoughtful and constructive discussions about its legal and ethical implications, social and economic impacts in a way, as well as legal and ethical implications. So, and now let me start this way. Everybody is talking about AI and in a way, the generative AI. In simple terms, Alex, what do you mean when they refer to AI versus the generative AI? And if you can please give a high level of description of the generative AI systems is, for example, what are the main components?
Sure, thank you. And before I start, I just want to say thanks to everyone for having me here. As mentioned, I'm a partner at Allen & Overy in our technology group. So I work with large tech companies, small companies, companies of all sizes on deploying, developing, and using generative AI. And as a law firm, we were one of the first large global law firms to use generative AI. So firsthand, we as attorneys have experienced, some of the issues and changes going on with AI and determining how it's going to impact our career in the future. But, with respect, or I should also note, I'm not an expert on AI. So we're here today to kind of give a high level overview of this topic. Of course, there's a lot of nuances in the technology and the law, but the goal here is to kind of help educate the audience on the big issues that are being talked about today. And before we can have a conversation, related to the question is, well, what are we talking about when we're talking about AI? Because AI is not really a new concept, but of course, over the past few years, we've been hearing a lot about generative AI. And really one way to think about it is AI is an umbrella term about techniques to make computers more human-like. So the goal of allowing a computer to sense, reason, act, or adapt like a human. And then there are various subsets of AI that a lot of you have probably heard of. So for example, machine learning is a term we hear a lot about, and that's a subset of AI that allows machines to learn about the past and make predictions about the future. So for example, weather forecasting or insurance risk forecasting or modeling flu trends. That's a common form of AI where we're looking at the past, predicting the future. And then another subset we're hearing a lot about is deep learning. And so this is a subset that refers to the concept of creating artificial neural networks, which is the ability to kind of mimic how the human brain processes information and reacts to information. And then we get to generative AI, which is really the use of deep learning to generate new original content. So we are, of course, seeing all of these new products and services that are allowing users to create text, images, audio, video. And this is, taking these existing techniques of AI and really creating a new use case. And we can get more into the components of these, but at a high level, this is really the novelty here. It's the ability to really put anything as input into an AI system and have a system provide output, as opposed to former models where the inquiry into the system was limited to a certain syntax or certain types of questions. And then I guess there was a second part to your question about the major components of AI systems, so I can touch upon that. Yeah, so as we talk about generative AI in particular, and we heard reference to some of the lawsuits about IP and ownership and some of the other issues, it's really important to take a step back and kind of understand what are the various components at a high level that a person should have knowledge about to understand the issues. So the first thing is really what I like to call the black box, the actual service that contains the generative AI itself. And we've all heard of LLMs, or large language models. And in simple terms, at the heart of a generative AI system is an LLM, which is really a computer program that has been fed lots of examples of text or other content. And it interprets that to kind of determine, based on certain input, what an output should be. So you really have the LLM, the software, you can think of it, software on a computer that's running. And then you have the input, which is what the user is putting into the system in order for the generative AI system to process and then provide an output. So input, output, LLM. And then the other big component is the data, the training data. Generative AI systems need lots of data in order to be able to predict what an output should be. And a lot of our discussion today will be about data. Where does it come from? What are the IP issues, data privacy issues, and other issues related to this type of data?
Thank you, Alex. What are the some of the considerations that the companies are facing when using AI?
Eileen, do you want to go first?
Yeah.
Or
yeah, sure. Before I get into that, I just want to note that this webinar is not a legal advice. This is just for general information purposes. And the opinions expressed here are my own and not the views of Johnson & Johnson. So that's out of the way. There are a lot of challenges. These challenges are for any kind of products, but AI brings, especially Gen AI, bring unique applications of these challenges to the products for the companies. And because there are gray areas here, law and regulations and policies are still evolving. One of the biggest key elements, I guess, as Alex said, AI, especially Gen AI, require massive amount of data to train the algorithm to learn all these examples and everything. And there are several ways of collecting this data. One of which is web scraping. So the AI scans the web, internet, the entire internet we're talking about. ChatGPT, pretty much spends almost billions of dollars scan and get that information. While they are doing that, they are going through blogs, social media, and anything they can find, Wikipedia, and whatnot. Web scraping can be challenging under data privacy laws, because just because some information is online and available public doesn't mean that you can use it freely or share it freely for whatever purpose. For example, under GDPR, I'm sure everybody somehow might have heard this, the data privacy law in Europe, which has a long arm. You don't need to be in Europe to be subject to this law. It can apply to the companies in Turkey, depending on the circumstances, especially if they are using EU residents' personal information. GDPR requires a lawful ground to collect, use, and share personal information. And on top, one of this lawful ground is consent. So you get the consent of the individual, you give them a notice, you're transparent, I collect this information about you for this purpose, and I share it with this companies for this purpose. So you get the consent. So when you're doing web scraping and then collecting everybody's personal information, obviously this step is skipped and not complied. There are other laws, for example, especially if you're scraping personal information that's password protected, that can also cause liabilities as well, depending on the region and the, where you're at. For example, on LinkedIn, I put my phone number for verification purposes, right? Sometimes they text me a code to make sure that I am who I am. So I log in and use it. That's the only purpose I give that information, not to give everybody so that they can call up and try to sell me stuff. So if you're web scraping LinkedIn and get my phone number like that, there are two sides of the story. The company who's scraping that passwords protected information can be liable. So as LinkedIn is supposed to protect my personal information and not allow this kind of stuff under particular, specific law, depending on the region, country, state, and whatnot. Privacy laws are almost everywhere right now in the world. So it's, GDPR is the most known and talked about probably, but there are several countries and regions that have similar data privacy laws. And I believe Turkey's adopted and still evolving on that as well, similar GDPR-like, European Union standard-like data personal information protection and security. In California, for example, there are similar laws. In the United States, state by state, there are over a dozen states that have similar strict data privacy laws. California, for example, requires disclosure that when I'm interacting with an AI, I need to know, I should be informed that I am interacting with an AI bot. It shouldn't be pretending to be a human. So transparency and openness is key. And similarly, especially, elections are coming up, using AI bots and AI technology for swaying voting decisions is regulated in certain states and countries as well. California is one of that. And this is the, web scraping part. And then there's also another way of collecting data for AI companies or Gen AI is the user itself providing it to the AI, Gen AI when they are typing these queries or prompts. I may enter my name, I don't know, while I'm engaging and interacting with an AI-enabled app or a product. That product might have access to my credit card information and whatnot. So the AI companies need to be very careful to protect this information and not to leak it. So there was a data leak, the first data breach that ChatGPT experienced about a year ago, I think, where some users could see other users' personal information in the output. So they were searching for something, and all of a sudden, some users' name, credit card information, and a bunch of other personal information popped up in the answer that they were asking. So obviously there are liabilities there as well for the company who didn't establish technical and administrative measures to prevent such data leak or unauthorized access to personal information. Yeah, transparency and consent, definitely like one of the big issues. Cross-border transfer is also another big issue for privacy. AI is trained faster in the cloud. So, your product may be, not necessarily a cloud product. It can be on-premise product. Let's think about B2B kind of solutions. You're using, as a company, you're using an AI product for your internal operations, for HR or, whatnot. So Typically, the AI companies train their algorithms in the cloud because it's faster. Training algorithm requires huge computing power. So your little PCs with a little chip inside is not going to be enough for it. You're gonna need GPU, or now they're coming up with LPU, another level. For fast computing, doing things within seconds instead of a PC that will take it for years to compute. So cloud is faster. So when you're talking about cloud, typically you're talking about cross-border personal information transfer. You collect the information in Europe, but you transfer it to a server in the United States. That has a lot of data privacy consequences and issues as well. It isn't necessarily an AI-specific issue, but the fact that if you're using the personal information to train our algorithm, that may have some data privacy considerations as well. So data rights is one thing, liability and accountability another. Who's liable if something goes wrong, if AI is inaccurate or it just hallucinates? Hallucination is basically when it's just completely wrong information. So it happened here in the United States. There are several situations where attorneys in a lawsuit, when they were representing their clients, they used ChatGPT ChatGPT to search for cases similar to theirs so they can put it in their motions when they file with the court. Well, turns out ChatGPT totally made up these cases. They just did not exist. So the attorneys were sanctioned by the court because they have an ethical duty to their clients and to the court to do due diligence and make sure that their submissions are accurate. And but what if there is no law or professional ethical rules for using output of a Gen AI that's completely inaccurate? How do we deal with that? Who's going to be liable for AI's decision making? It's a machine making the decision. So intent and negligence, this kind of factors that typically go to liability, gets a little bit blurred. These are kind of like the interesting stuff. And bias, obviously, it's super relevant, or another ethical issue as well. Whatever you feed the machine with, that's what it's going to spit out. So if you feed it with biased data, intentionally or not, it's just gonna, the output, the predictions, the suggestions, and the content generated is going to be biased. And it can create liabilities for companies if they are relying on this AI decision making for making biased decisions, like hiring in HR. In California and in a lot of other regions, countries, you cannot discriminate someone based on their gender, race, sexual orientation or whatnot in your hiring decisions. So if you end up having a pattern, this AI keeps telling you to hire, men, and you don't hire women, that company may become liable, perhaps. Can we keep the AI maker liable for it, for making this kind of decision, training the, data that way? Perhaps not under a contract. If you're using an HR specific AI from a vendor, and then it is giving you this biased information, you may want to go back to them and say, you need to be liable. Look, I'm getting in trouble for it. If it's in your contract, maybe, but will the AI company allow such liability in the contract? Probably not. If you don't have it under the contract, then what resources, remedies do you may have? So these are the kind of interesting issues around AI and AI legal implications. Alex, do you have
Very
any?
important remarks, Aylin. By the way, it's 12th of March 2024, and today in the official Gazette in Turkey, a couple of articles of Turkish personal data protection law has been changed. It will be in force by June 2024, and a couple of other articles will be in force by the third quarter of the year. And mainly, the idea of these changes are coming close to GDPR, and also simplifying the data transfer abroad, which is very important, because it's not only the abroad. When we talk about, we don't talk about the countries, as you also mentioned, the cloud and usage of the cloud. It is usually the transfer of abroad, because the cloud is, you don't know where the cloud is, or they most probably be outside your country. So there has been a significant change also in Turkey just today. And Alex, maybe you want to add some comments on this issue, especially as Aylin mentioned, what are the potential legal challenges that the companies may face in the use of and the development of AI? And Aylin, if you want to continue also specific challenges, of course, but Alex, do you want to add a comment on this? Or?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, there are a few comments I'd like to make. Aylin hit on, a lot of great points. There's a lot of stuff to talk about with generative AI. So I think one thing to know, like as we were talking about, well, what is generative AI? Aylin made the comment that the data that comes out is only as good as the data that goes in, which is a really good point. Generative AI tools, text-based ones, are not a search engine. People are going to some of these chatbots and putting in questions and getting answers and assuming they're correct, right? And that they're coming from some reputable source, and then taking that and citing it. For example, Aylin mentioned some attorneys in court, have done this. Hallucinations are a big problem. What generative AI tools generally are doing are predicting what the response should be. They're not necessarily just searching the internet or some verified source and giving you an answer. They're predicting. So if the data used to train the tool is not accurate, or there wasn't enough data on the subject you are asking about, the answer may not be accurate. So I think that's, a great example of one of the issues with generative AI. And you can imagine, if you're getting output that's incorrect and using it and relying on it, there can be a lot of liability and problems. The other, I think, great point made was about cloud services, the global nature. This is, of course, the way the world operates today with business, right? Everything is global. With technology like generative AI, which is cutting edge and where the regulations and the laws haven't caught up, this leaves a lot of uncertainty as to how to operate a business and what liabilities a business may face, because we're in the middle of jurisdictions just looking into this and starting to pass laws, right? So it is a bit of an exercise for companies to sit down, work with their legal advisors, other advisors, and kind of figure out what laws to focus on and how to best limit their liability. Another, I think, interesting point, data privacy, that was discussed. Ingestion of data is a big issue, right? Especially, as Aylin mentioned, with data privacy. There are a lot of concerns about what the data sources are and what may be coming out of these tools. I read just this week that there is a company that hosts 43% of the internet's 10 million most popular websites. It's a very well-known content management system. They are allegedly, these are all, leaked rumors, allegedly going to sell data to two very large generative AI companies. And when they were contacted by the press about, concerns over selling this data from like a very popular platform, their response was, there are settings that the website owners can select in the settings to shut off the data from being shared with these companies or being shared otherwise. That's great, of course, that there's an option to do that. But the problem is there are no laws that require search engines or scrapers to follow those tags, right, or those settings. And of course, the terms of service, which is a contract, could still potentially override those settings. So without strong regulations, there are risks that data can be ingested into these tools. And it's not just with generative AI that this data can be used with, right, going into this large language model. There are other types of AI where this data could be used: facial recognition, bioinformatics, right? Other different types of AI technology where data can go. So these are all, these things are happening live as we speak, right? We're all still trying to figure out what are the best ways to protect ourselves. But going back to your original question about considerations that companies should make when using generative AI, I'd like to touch on, some of the things we work on with our clients when thinking about using these systems. So this can be in the context of negotiating an agreement for generative AI services and what we would look at, or just you as a user, if you're going to go onto the internet and use any random generative AI service, go look at the terms of use and look at some of the things I'm going to talk about and how that could impact your use. So for example, one issue is input. What does the agreement say about how the service provider can use the input you are giving? So if you're going to go use a generative AI tool and input a bunch of sensitive data, personal data, or other confidential information, you have to consider, is that data going to be ingested into the tool, and what can the service provider do with the data? If we are working with clients that have very sensitive data, we may advise them that the contract should say the service provider can only use the data to provide services to that one client. The data cannot be ingested, right, into a tool in a way that would benefit other users. And so you start to look at the deployment. Island mentioned cloud versus an on-premise solution, right? That there can also be other solutions where it's still cloud, but it's an individual cloud, one instance for your company or your use. So there's no containment of data going across users. Another big thing we look at is output. Who owns the output? A lot of users are using these tools, getting the output, assuming, oh, I have it, I'm going to go use it. Well, the output, first of all, one issue is the output can be the same for multiple users, right? You shouldn't assume what you get is going to be unique to you. The other thing to look at, though, is who owns the output. If you want to use it and you're going to a tool and you want to take what comes out and go use it, you need to have the right to do that. And where do you find that right? For now, it should be in the contract, because IP laws are uncertain right now as to who owns output generated by a machine. And in fact, in the US, the Copyright Office has provided guidance that works purely generated by a machine are probably not going to be protectable under US copyright. I say probably because there are always nuances to these things. There's a level of human input with the machine that could change the scale, but we can get into the weeds of that later. But just high level, who has the rights to the input, who has the rights to the output, and then you also need to think about liability generally. If you're a company and you have a lot of sensitive data, or you're going to use generative AI in a way that your company relies on it, it becomes a critical part of your business. Who are you doing business with? How do they train their models, right? You want to make sure you have an understanding of what your risk is. And a big part of that is, where is the data they're getting coming from? And are they willing to protect you if something goes wrong? So for example, Microsoft offers Azure OpenAI. It's their own version of using GPT models from OpenAI. Microsoft offers something called their copyright commitment. They are willing to protect users of their service from certain types of liability and infringement claims. There are specific requirements and conditions to that, but generally, when they announced that, that was a big deal, because it gave companies comfort that if they go use a Microsoft Azure OpenAI service and comply with the conditions, they will have protection. So again, when we're looking at considerations and we're looking at contracts, what types of reps and warranties is the service provider making? What type of indemnification are they willing to provide? And does that meet your requirements or the requirements of your company?
Thank you, Alex. And I would like to also come to the from legal aspects to the ethical issues. What are the some of the, let's say, ethical issues that the societies and the companies are facing because of AI? Maybe Eileen, would you like to pick that question?
Yeah,
And
sure.
not only what are the issues, and also how can companies or the societies can navigate the ethical and legal implications of AI use and development?
Mm-hmm.
Let's say.
The ethical considerations may come up in either case, whether the company is using a third-party service provider AI product, or they are developing an AI product when they are developing one. While developing an AI product, it's the expectation from an ethical point of view and evolving laws now in Europe. There's a European Union regulation on AI coming up, first of its kind, actually. And then there's President Biden's executive order here in the United States, again, establishing framework and guidance to certain federal government institutions to establish regulations and laws around that, like USPTO is one of that. U.S. Patent and Trademark Office is one of them. Homeland Security is another. So basically, there is an evolving principles around how to develop or use AI ethically. And one of it is very much about transparency. Transparency around how AI is trained, based on what kind of data AI uses, and be very mindful of it. And also how to be able to explain the explainability of how the AI is making the decision. Because sometimes AI is making this decision, you have no idea how if you don't develop it properly, you wouldn't understand probably why the algorithm is trained that way and why it is making that kind of output or suggestion or prediction to you. So the principles around developing AI in a more open, transparent way for the users or the companies who are using them to understand, or the developers, to the ones that are actually developing, to understand how the AI is actually making decisions, how the validation and verification is working, and then involvement of a human verification as well, like not necessarily completely rely on the output of AI as is to do things, but review and verify, and to make sure that we are doing the right things, as I said, like in the hiring decisions or other use cases, to make sure that we are not companies are not biased, or they are not coming up with ethically wrong outputs. Like for example, another principle is just to develop the AI in a way that it doesn't enable crimes to be committed. For example, ChatGPT or others around, like, if I say, how can I murder someone and get away with it in California? And then it tells me exactly how to do it. That's a problem here, right? That's very obvious. And there was a show, How to Get Away with Murder. That's why it came up. Not that there's a real case about it. Developing the products in a way that it shouldn't give output based on queries or prompts that's for crime committing. But sometimes lines get blur. Deep fake videos, for example, So in its own, it may not be necessarily bad, because if you're using it for parody or sarcasm, or you're using your own image to create this, to distribute around, how would the AI know about it, whether for what purpose you want to use it? There's a step to stop, and then the human actually decides why to use it. There's that one too. So deepfakes are an issue, obviously, for so many levels. Ethics is one of that. Another is obviously celebrities' images are being used for selling products and services that they do not actually sponsor or endorse. So that's a whole host of publicity rights issue. And then and another topic about motion pictures and other studios actually having rights on the likeness images of the actors and actresses, and using AI, products to actually use those images and make them, co-star in a movie that they didn't sign up for example. So these are all interesting topics and hotly debated, and it's just still evolving. Yeah, Alex?
Yeah, so many things to talk about, with ethics and policy. From an IP or just legal point of view, it's interesting to think about the ethics of AI from the lens of, do we want to encourage the use of AI, in particular generative AI? Do we believe that this is great technology, it's going to change the world, and we should really encourage our lawmakers to pass laws to help take away some of the uncertainty about liability, so we get more production, more use of this technology, can really help advance society. But of course, when new technology comes about, there's always resistance. I was reading about when cameras first came out back in, I think, the late 1800s, or maybe 1900s. I'm not exactly sure on the date, but someone was objecting to photographs being subject to copyright protection because they said all the person is doing is pressing a button and the camera makes a picture. Why should that be subject to copyright? That's the same type of conversation we're having now with generative AI, right? Should a user who puts some input into a machine be able to get copyright protection? That's a question I think as society we need to address. Like, yes, we have some laws about this, we have some guidance, but if we really think, again, this technology can change the way we do things in a positive way, maybe we need to revisit some of the laws and provide more guidance. Similarly, with respect to data, these tools, as we said, are only as good as the data they get. And if we're not going to provide a clear framework on what the rules are about where data can come from, what the liability is, there may be resistance for people to develop the technology or people to use it. And so we are seeing this debate play out in various jurisdictions around the world. There are lawsuits going on in the US right now about generative AI. There are many different legal theories that are being asserted. One is about the data and copyright infringement, and this concept of fair use, right? Which is, there are certain circumstances where under the law, you are allowed to copy data and it won't be considered a violation of copyright laws. But, this is something for us as a society we have to consider. Is it fair for a company to go get a bunch of public data and use it in AI and not be liable in the same way as someone else who might copy the data? And I've been listening to a lot of commentators over the past year or two talking about this stuff. It's been interesting, but one commentator I listened to made the example of, why is it okay for a human to go ingest a bunch of data and use it, but not a machine? Obviously, there's a difference between how much data a human can ingest. It's going to be a much smaller scale, but in a way, I kind of understand the point, right? As a human, I can go read a bunch of websites, I can understand the data, I go use it, no one would object. I mean, technically, I'm probably still bound by terms of service, and there could be a liability if I was copying 100%, but it's just interesting to think about it at a conceptual level, as we're all trying to figure out what is the path forward. With bias, Aylan mentioned bias. That's been a big problem well before generative AI. We've seen other AI tools, facial recognition, or other similar tools that have had a lot of issues with bias because of the data they were trained on. For example, if the data was trained on with facial recognition, if the tool was trained on data from a group of people who are of one race, the tool may not work well for a group from another race. And that's something we saw come out. And so, again, should we as a society want regulations about this? Should we be forcing companies when they're developing tools to make sure they are doing it in a way so the output is accurate? Or should we leave this to companies to decide to make a pact among themselves, for industry groups to help provide guidance? These are, again, things people are looking at least for now with generative AI, like we're at the very start in the US of regulations. We've had a few executive orders from the White House directing some of the agencies to start looking into generative AI and presenting frameworks, but it's just the start. We don't have a lot of guidance, but we've seen some of the big players in the space, companies, make agreements with each other, for example, about the elections and what they should be doing to help with deepfakes and other content out there that's potentially going to interfere with the election. So I think big picture is a lot of self-regulation, and it's for lawmakers and society to kind of figure out, like, what do we want to do from a legal point of view, from a regulatory point of view. You're on mute.
You're on mute. You're still on mute. Çiğdem, we can't hear you. You're on mute.
Sorry. We have 25 minutes, 15 minutes left, almost, or less than 13 minutes left. So there are a couple of very distinguished questions. Aylin, as you mentioned the deep fakes, there is just one question. How do you envision the future of deep fakes? What measures should companies and individuals take to address this issue? One of the attendees is asking.
Mm-hmm. In the EU regulation, for example, for AI, it is categorizing the risk level, and deepfake is probably, that falls on the high risk level, where you're using someone's biometric data. If you're using in the deepfake, I assume you're using someone else's, not necessarily yours. In that case, that's a big violation of privacy, trust, and whatnot, and rights, right? And privacy may not is just one of the component, but as I said, if you're a famous person, it could be even your publicity rights and this and that, and it could be defamation, it could be libel, depending on what you make me say, embarrassing or disparaging things, and all that. So how do we deal with that? It's tough because again, the AI product may not necessarily, I guess one of the things, I'm just, being creative, thinking creatively here. AI product may perhaps ask whether, you have the permission to use this image, because the AI product will understand you're not using your image. So to begin with, this is a third-party image. Third-party video, and then if AI determines, oh, actually this is a president's image, and you are not the president, and just stop maybe even doing that deepfake or or whatnot. So there may be some controls around, AI actually training itself to prevent bad faith use of this kind of videos. In general, I guess when you make deepfake, most of the time it is really not used in good faith, but you can't really say 100% of the time it is not a fair use. So again, this goes to the question of like, guns, right? You can use the guns for good and you can use the gun for bad. So how do we deal with that? Again, I guess maybe, giving the liability to the user and the intent that they have. In terms of the liability and accountability may help. But then how are you going to enforce it? In this today's global, world, the deepfake product is launched or, from, I don't know, some country that may not really have strong regulations and enforcement and whatnot. And it's in the cloud and you can take it down. It's on the website that you have no control. In most of the, websites, you can actually notify the website owner and say, this is without my permission, somebody put something about me, put it down. And they would do it under their terms of use or under regulations, depending on which country you're in. So this may not be applicable in those countries. So how do you deal with that? How do you take it down? So the governments and countries need to collaborate. Crimes don't happen, just here. Crimes or liabilities and accountability typically, especially in today's world with the internet and AI, covers multiple regions. So the governments need to and countries need to collaborate and have maybe perhaps like treaties and conventions like they had, like Berne Convention for copyright ownership. We have standard rules and principles across everywhere. I mean, almost everywhere who agree to the Berne Convention, or other patent-related or other kind of related laws. Maybe some treaty, where hopefully all the countries abide by, and then they help enforcing this kind of laws and regulations that they agree to in the treaty and keep the people liable if there's a use and take it down. More importantly, take it down and mitigate damage. So that's, I'm thinking, yeah.
Thank you, Aylin.
Also, if I can just interject, because it's a really interesting issue. In the election cycle we're having in the US right now, there were robocalls, like robots calling citizens and faking the voice of Joe Biden in one of the primary elections we just had. And that was a big deal, right? Like people were confused. So I think it's on all of us as a society to also be more aware that there is a lot of fake content. I think we know that at this point, but deepfakes are really easy to forget about because you're watching a video and thinking it's real. From a regulatory point of view, like one thing people are talking about is forcing companies to embed tags, right, in videos produced on their service to try and help identify, the source or what service is used in some of those issues. But of course, there's no perfect solution. I think Aylin's exactly right. Like countries need to come together and pass comprehensive global solutions to these problems.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, tagging is a good idea. I mean, they already do it with music, They scan the internet and they immediately detect if there's an infringement, yeah. Go ahead.
There is one other question which is related to what we have been discussing. It says, if we were to prepare an AI policy as a group of the companies, what should we primarily pay attention to? Given that regulations are still very new and ethical and liability issues are required ambiguous at the moment, what would you recommend? So we are in the last minutes, so maybe it will be a kind of sum up that you have been advising all these issues. How can a policymaker for the company can handle these challenges?
Inventory management, making policies is definitely one that policymakers should make policies, and inventory keeping about the data. What kind of data does the company have? What they are using it for? Where they are using it for what purpose? And keeping track of it, and data governance policies as well. Who has access to it, why they are using it, who they are sharing it with. Audit also helps to make sure that, internal departments and everybody in the company are actually complying with these policies. And training helps, again, regular training about the policy and applications of it. Policies around use of Gen AI, Alex already mentioned. Most companies, many companies consider having internal policies for their employees not to use, or use it for only particular circumstances, Gen AI, OpenAI, or ChatGPT. When ChatGPT came up, I know some companies immediately told their employees not to use it, so that the employees won't enter confidential information or source code to fix a bug or whatnot, all the IP and other information or personal information that belongs to a company, the company asset, not to go outside of the company where they lose control of it and it ends up maybe with a competitor or whatnot. So having policies around use of Gen AI internally, like your employees, or use of Gen AI, by your service providers. You may not even know when you plug in, when you're using a service provider for your internal purposes, or when you integrate it to your product. You may be using a SaaS company or software as a service company, or whatnot, to integrate their features and to your own product when you're developing yours. And if you're not aware, that turns out actually the technology you're plugging in has a Gen AI capability, that may have consequences for you and liabilities to your customers as well, if your customers' data is being used for Gen AI purposes and training algorithm by your service provider. So you should inquire whether they are using Gen AI and have policies, or I would suggest that you inquire your service providers whether they have Gen AI and what they use it for, and have policies around whether you're going to accept it or not, in what circumstances.
Okay. Maybe last but not least, there is another question about the comparison between the US and GDPR. It says, according to GDPR or the US Act, can the data collected on a platform, such as e-commerce websites or social media platforms, be used to develop analytical models on the platform in an anonymous manner? Can they take into account the DML models as well?
I didn't get it. Can they use under GDPR or US?
According to GDPR or the US Act, so it's vice versa, can the data collected on a platform be used to develop analytical models on the platform in an anonymous manner?
Anonymous.
Anonymous, yes.
Anonymization is also processing data. So just, when you have a personal data, I'm assuming on a platform as in your own platform as a developer, you have is that what they are saying?
It says such a e-commerce website or a social media platform. So it's not its own platform. It's a publicly opened platform.
Okay, so that goes to web scraping. So if you're going to a third party's website and you're collecting data, personal data from their website, then yes, under GDPR, there may be some liabilities and issues. As I said, you should have a lawful ground to do it. So you won't have the consent of the individual whose data you're collecting. Even if you end up anonymizing it, that is processing. And to process, even to anonymize someone's personal information, you need to have lawful grounds to do it. You can't just get to do it just because it's out there online available, or not even available, especially if it is password protected, as I mentioned. So for the US laws are tricky as in the states, each, in the US it's a state and federal, so each state may have their own privacy laws, and also federally there may be industry specific laws, like HIPAA for healthcare, or COPPA for children, under a certain age, for their online using their personal information, or other telecommunication related laws and whatnot. So it can cause some issues and liabilities and accountability. And anonymization alone is also using someone's data, basically.
Any comments, Alex?
Yeah, I mean, in addition to thinking about data privacy laws, you also have to think about what the contract says, right? And in most of these relationships, there's a contractual relationship. And so that's where you need to see if you are a user of a platform and you're worried about the collection of data, what terms are you agreeing to when you sign up to use those services? Or if you want to collect data from your users, vice versa, right? What terms are you putting in your agreements to be able to do that? Because even if the GDPR doesn't allow that without consent, if you're using a platform as a user, you're probably giving consent for the platform to do a lot of stuff with your data.
Okay, before we end up, do you want any mention any other thing? Aylin, the last words, Alex.
I mean, I'll just, on the comment about the AI policy, I think it's a good question and something everyone should be thinking about. If you're working in a company or you're in charge of the policy or the use of technology, you should maybe be treating generative AI like open source, right? Nobody should use it until they understand what the rules are, because there can be, and it's not to say people shouldn't use it at all. It's just like people should use it being aware of the issues so it's used in the right way, or so the right data is put into the system, or the data that comes out of it is used in the right way. So it's a great idea to have a policy. It's something lots of big companies are doing right now is, we're working with them to draft like comprehensive AI policies. So great question.
Aylin?
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, I think.
No other comments?
Yeah,
Okay.
I mean, common sense is always a good thing to have, I guess, in anything.
Yeah.
Just common sense.
It's over the ethics and law of the common sense, isn't that?
Yeah.
That's what makes the law and the ethics. So we talk about the AI and law. The law for business people, not for the lawyers. And I guess we try really hard with my distinguished speakers, distinguished colleagues. Thank you very much, Alex and Aylin. We talk about AI to generative AI, how the deep learning affects the extension of AI and the large language models. And we mentioned that the need of the loss of data and data processes, and of course the challenges of the compliance to data protection laws and regulations, starting from GDPR to the local laws and regulations. And then we stress the liabilities law, the liabilities, what is the purpose of this usage of the data and other liabilities. And then we talk about the data leakages and data breaches and its consequences, as well as ethics, and finally the deepfakes, the fair usages, and the AI policies. Thank you very much. Ayşegül, do you have any other comments?
Thank you. This was such an excellent, in-depth discussion about this. I do want to extend my thanks to you, first of all, Çiğdem, for moderating this all the way from Istanbul, and our distinguished panelists who contributed so firmly to Aylin and Alex. Thank you very much for that. Keep watching us. We'll bring more information about technology and AI to you folks in Istanbul. So thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a pleasure.
Thank you.
All right, take care.
Thanks.